this great stone, the big meteorite, came booming down to Earth, and on its way it compressed the air, and the air got such a high temperature that it liquidized the stone beneath it. And I think this goes to show that all systems are susceptible to massive change. But of course, the intention also needs to be massive as well. And I would say the same to be the case here, that in order to really change the system thoroughly to the ground, we need to have a very decisive intention. And the material for this lecture is, or the idea of this lecture, the zest of the lecture, is to show how to gather the momentum to make it possible for the possibility of going into a higher level. And do remember, everything, all of our Geschichte, all of our education, sort of have relied on, I wouldn't say confirmed, because just as in the case of Julian Barber, exactly the same thing in reality can have sort of different Necky cube takes. Be careful, don't call them interpretations. They are as real as they come. This is something to be avoided, to say that the Necky cube has different interpretation and that there is a true Necky cube out there. Actually, when you think about it hard, it doesn't make any sense. What would that Necky cube without any properties be? So the meteorite, the size of a smaller country, was the impetus or the intention, so to speak, of the complexity system of our galaxy. And it led to an elevation of the biosphere on Earth. It made for more complexity in the end by eradicating the prevailing system, a system that made sense, was consistent, so to speak, paradox-free, did work, and would have continued to work for another couple of eons, were hastily terminated by something that is similar to chance. And as you will see in the later lectures, chance is not that clear what chance is. Chance needs to be looked at a bit more careful, and you will see that chance is a slasktratt, as we say in Swedish. It's a gathering category that actually have different sub-portions that are not the same at all. It's a term that is to be avoided within physics, but we don't have a choice here because we are talking in normal language, and therefore chance will have to come into the awareness for a while, and then we can sort of discard with it. In this newer system, there will be quite a considered more amount of LODs, and there will be more possibilities for thinking, being, and this is of course similar to going into the why question. The why shows that intention is at work again. The why question is immensely important to open up this area, to make it possible to, so to speak, venture into new pastures, to be existing on a higher level of understanding. And I will go into 3 factors here that should be present. Number 1, this is most important because this takes into the consideration the group I'm having with 3 to 4 people that I talk to on a regular basis, and we discuss how to get out of a lower chaotic system than normal, being burned out. I would say that's a chaotic system, if any. And the first part of this first one is an understanding that all other methods that have been constructed to this very day in the purpose of doing something, claiming something, going in a certain direction, or above all, promise of presence and existence, have been constructed in that purpose of preserving the lower chaotic system. And this is so because the control of the whole system can only be done through thinking. There are no methods that involves other things than thinking that could work. So this is not maturiter, this is the endogenous that we need to reach into. And we don't have much of an option here, which is not as bad as it sounds. But somehow we need to understand that this desperate feel of a lack that so often is displayed in metaphysics of presence, logocentrism, or the modern day, this search for a supplement to fulfill the lack we are feeling within ourselves, this lack of presence. We need to understand that is a just search. It is just where you go that is unjust. But the search in itself doesn't have any fault to it. It is just like looking for water but going into the wrong place. I've done that myself in the woods. So there's nothing wrong with wanting water, but you go looking in the wrong place. And no knowledge of place have been sort of visible until this very day. We haven't known what was possible before. It is inherently something completely new. It comes with quantum mechanics, and that's the first opening up of an absolutely new way of seeing these things. And this is also the understanding that reality in itself is put into question, so to speak. Well, at least we show that it can be arranged in a different way. And we can only change reality, so to speak, by changing ourselves. And the way into that is changing our thinking. So we need to, little by little, move away from other methods and trying a style that has as their express purpose or unexpressed purpose of this, of sort of preserving the now, and instead take this new knowledge that hasn't been well distributed until this very day to reality. and to show that there is a possibility of something grander, something bigger. And that is the message on quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics alone can give this message, because it's a message of reality itself, not our presuppositions of it. And I would say this is one of the reasons it was so important for me to understand that the discoveries within the exogenous, the outer world, made in quantum mechanics, changed something that I perceive to be completely inner. That is logic. And the first realization that came to me that was identity. I think something that you remember, Henry, quite well, happens like 2 years ago, sitting in the bathtub actually. But it was a eureka moment. It was one of those very important pointers that here is the outer reality, and it tells us something about our inner thing. And that was something that was completely impossible for me to perceive to be the case. And I bet you no one within the institution of logic would ever come up with the idea that something outer can change the inner. I had this profound division between outer and inner that didn't allow for any change coming from the outside changing the inside. And I guess by now you understand the pointing of quantum mechanics, how important that is. We won't be able to do anything until we understand the importance of that pointing. And I'm completely convinced this can be put in regular language. It doesn't really take mathematics, because once we understand that reality itself is multi-level, we will also understand that one level can be completely correct to all eyes. It's just this little extra that quantum mechanics demanded of reality that couldn't be paradox-free, solved within the system, that sort of trigger the whole thing. Or as I think Julian Barber would put it, the current model of explaining the world was put to a Gödelian test, but in this case it was more of reality, really pointing to that we can't have a consistent and a coherent physical system like classical physics wanted to be. And here is the second take on this. We will here understand that thinking is not that like isolated process from the world. I mentioned earlier this nesting thing, that everything nests to each other, and the interpenetrative force of the matrushka, that the different dimensions go into each other, and there is a constant flux from level to level, between the levels going into each other and constantly reinforcing each other. And this shows that thinking in the old system, so to speak, the old chaotic system, has a quite passive role to play. And who can explain that better than our own master René Descartes? For him, as he expresses so well, thinking is caused by outer things. It's not caused by some agent within himself. It's outer stimuli. That would put Descartes almost in the same position as a Pavlovian dog, albeit a bit more complex. Thinking in this newer model of fractality is of a completely different degree. It's a degree difference that is absolutely massive. In this take, thinking is incredibly decisive, and how you think is very important. remember once more the telling from quantum mechanics that, for instance, identity and the law of exclude middle are not things of neither external reality or internal reality. That goes to show those things are much more important. And I also mentioned many times the famous lectures by Auge Bohr and why it's so important not to use existence, because it's completely inapt for the complexities of the higher level. Existence won't do it. It's a simplification only. It is not wrong as such, but it's a little bit like bringing a BB gun to a shootout. It doesn't fit the circumstances. That is the main objection of Auge Bohr. I think a great comparison can also be done to Edward de Bono. He speaks about passive information systems. And he explained it so well with his sandbox for children, and a little drizzling rain starts, and in the beginning the raindrops falls everywhere, but after a while passively small streams starts to diverge and converge the drips into these streams, so they will not roll over the hills and fall over the hills in a random manner, and automatically we will have structures that are bigger, whole systems of streams ending up in rivers and waterfalls and greater constructs. But the important thing, this is absolutely passive. It doesn't have any intention in it. And therefore the thinking is this, in this passive activity, is rather helpless. It is a sort of a handicap thinking. It's a thinking without clarity. It is this ruminating thinking that goes that way, this way. It is weak, it doesn't terminate in action. It doesn't show you the way to pretension, and is not active enough to do retention. And I think it was so obvious from the explanation, he really describes everything so accurate of Cartesius. As he describes his soul, it is something of a process that's very close to what later came to be known as the clock metaphor. Seeing the human soul, or human soul and body, as a clock. And the zest of the whole thing there, it is automatic. We are clocking away, and so is the clock of Cartesius' soul. And it doesn't have any effect in the world. It just happened to be that the world, our body, moves in the same clock pace as the wishes of the thinking. So you see, there's a very low level idea of what thinking can do. It can only sort of passively come into existence and then disappear out of existence. And they are not interconnected. There is a big space in the Cartesian seeing of what thinking is, very close to what is perceived by modern man. Thinking just comes and goes. We don't uphold our awareness into the future nor into the past. It is constantly renewed somehow from nowhere. And in this new renewal process, there is nothing left. It is like the ego for each moment absorbs everything, sucks everything up like a big sponge. doesn't leave anything for the next moment. So there is no continuance in this lower level. I'd say there is some weak continuance, because it's still a chaotic system, but I would say it's very little in comparison. And we can reach this in the higher system. For each higher level of chaotic system, you gain permanence and you gain direction, and you also gain broadness in the thinking. This is what Susie Froebel called delta T width. And apart from broadness, you will in the end also have depth. That means you can have a thinking on many levels. And that actually means that you can do things simultaneous. And it also means, for instance, for people who are suffering burnout, they don't need to put paper quotes everywhere to help them remember what to do, because all of a sudden the mental area is broadened. That is delta T depth, width, and is also deepened, so many thinking can go on at the same time. And that was also something demanded by Frederick Matthias Alexander, one of those things that never got understood. That you do sequencing, let the neck be free so as the head can move forward and upward, and widen and broaden, widen and lengthening your back, one after another in sequence, but also at the very same time, simultaneously. So it seems that the intuitions of Frederick Matthias Alexander was well ahead of his time. Another parallel that could help is to look at space and see the common today in the lower chaotic system only three perpendicular directions, x, y, z. This is also a fractality, but it's a lower level fractality, and it doesn't give enough complexity for our body to spring into existence. And thereby we make this cardboard-like body with only a shrapnel of the complexities in the fractality that we could actually access. And we get this flattened out body perspective. This is why it's so good to take in what's above us and what's underneath us, and also to send a little thinking behind ourselves to see that there is space there. And in that moment, you get this expansion. By explaining this in a fractal way, it makes a lot more sense. It becomes understandable to a higher degree, because it doesn't really make sense in the lower chaotic system to sort of expand. How do you expand? Well, with fractality you understand that the interpenetrative action of space means that your body will be more distinct, not less distinct. And one of the keys to understanding that is to understand the interpenetrative action of space. And this is actually the very same thing as the nested quality that Susie Froebel talks about. It is that protension nests into retention, and retention nests into protension, and this is the awareness that makes up the now. You can also see that, or say that, the fractality of only 3 dimensions does not give enough texture for us to be localized. And this is also very typical for the olden system, where we think that localization could be made once and for all. Just put up an Origo and I decide where is Hans Johansson situated in this world. I give different factors to my position X, Y, Z, and then I just need the timeline and the forces, and I don't have to do anything else. It's done. That won't work in fractality. We really need to do localization. It's a thinking activity, and it needs to be iterated in the same way that the patterns are iterated in a firm, in an ordbok, to make it stable, to make it resilient, to make it survive from day to day, which it does. It is a very good example, because quite directly you will understand why would Mother Nature make the fern so complex if it wasn't for stability and resilience. And this is, of course, also beauty, because there is an inherent beauty in this. Not, I would say, projected beauty. It is really there, because fractality in itself, as I mentioned from Pollock's the other day, fractality itself, when it gets more complex, is beauty. It is also truth. This is the truth of the original. It is in its very fractality that it shows its truth. And this what you will gain in this higher level is that your words will be fitting for the purpose. They will not be happenstantially like before. They will have deciding powers. So you see here, the XYZ model is in itself passive. You only localize once instead of localizing all the time. And having an XYZ point only to say I am localized here, that is not enough information when coming to a more complex reality like the exogenous is. It's governed by fractality. And in fractality, you have to have your own horizon, so to speak, the hermeneutical horizon to meet the exogenous of space. It's an active procedure. And this rhymes so well with all the other things. Perception is active, thinking is active, localization is of course also active. It cannot be done once and for all. But somehow, this is what you have to make do with. You don't have much choice in the lower system. So this is not a criticism. This is more pointing that by giving more, you will receive more. By putting more into the project of your thinking power, you will be rewarded by much more. There will be a giving and a taking to a much higher degree. And you also see here how confirmation of the reality of the present world, the lower world, the one I mean now, it also sort of directed by or governed by this passivity. It's an automatic procedure, the rumination we have in our head to confirm all past events and stamp them with that was real. And you go through them in your head again and again, and it's a self-copying system of thoughts. And the confirmator is the ego itself. An automatic process, a process that could be opened up to be made even more resilient, stronger, and do its work to a bigger degree, a more encompassing, comprehensive ego. This is expansion of the onlooker. And I would say that's the same thing that happens when you expand in space. You also make your observer bigger by sort of pointing your attention outwards into the world, taking in the behind, the above, thinking there are a flock of geese flying over myself. And the sheer randomness that this lack of accuracy, the passivity gives, also gives us this randomness that we come to appreciate as the very signature of reality. When we have the smell of randomness, we know it's real. We don't trust things that, like synchronicity, that is too law binding. Randomness is a very important thing. Oddly enough, and it goes hand in hand with determinism. Determinism is the saying that everything is determined, but we just don't know how, because it's way too complicated. And this rhymes with the ball I mentioned 2 lectures ago. The ball we see as a collection of atoms, so we can't count them because there are a gazillion of them in the ball. This nested quality, that interpenetrative character of space, says that the ball is one entity in a way, in a very normal way. And we can do tell where the ball is going to go, as a good footballer would do. How can he know that? He doesn't know anything about classical physics. Well, he knows what an interpenetrative space is. He needs to know that. And he opens up his own ego in the play, in the interactiveness with the other player, even if the players are not his own team. That's an odd thing, like playing in rhythms together, even if you are supposed to be sort of playing against the other team. It doesn't really make sense in the old logic, but here it makes sense. Maybe that's why the Romans appreciated good enemies, because they made them more alive, not because of the peril, but of the greater interactive force. It is our possibility to be more satisfied, being more alive, being more here, being in the now, means with a capital letter more, being able to intently do projections that end in success, and doing retention that actually gives us nutrients and do not diminish us, like the take is in classical physics or the lower system. Because every time we go back, we have either lost something that cannot be retaken, or it's something negative. And it doesn't matter in the low system, it is drainage of energy. Either you don't have it anymore, it's not in the now anymore, or it's something bad, and then it still sort of damage you because it takes down the now, the projection. So there is as you can see here, a great quality difference. It's lower energy, lower direction in the old system. And this want for full presence, this metaphysics of presence, is also a very little want. It's not a great intention, because all the energy is already sucked up by this ruminating on the past, either things lost or horrible things given. We are engaged in that, and once we fail with one prediction of the future, one projection of the future, next time we will do it little less intently, and in the end we will be convinced beforehand that our projections won't be successful. And I think that is actually built into the low system. To a much greater degree. So there is a dissatisfaction, and this dissatisfaction leads to that fervent want of presence, to getting all the things back that we lost, and getting rid of the things that we don't want to have. And we make these divisions in the past, and thereby we divide the energy that the past could have given us. It is not fully present to the same way anymore. And this is how it works on the lower level. It is a constant rumination. It's lower quality of prediction and projection. We get less and less satisfied, and we start to accept that this is reality and this is what we have to make do. But looking from a higher perspective, it looks like we are not fully engaged in our perceptual system. That somewhere we are still doing things, and it's like consciously we are trying to be passive, or we are passive by a decision. And that passivity is confirmed by the loop, and that loop makes the world really be out there somehow, and we get accustomed to that, and in the end we start thinking, is that all I can have? And we start to want that even more, in the scare of losing even that. And I think that's a tendency that is in action after a while. And that could actually give force to the idea we should stick to the level. But I don't agree. That is not necessary, because the second and very important thing needs to come into the picture, and it's that realization you don't lose out on anything. Even the things that you excessively want, not even those things get lost. Nothing gets lost. And that is because of the very fractality. It adds on. You can have many thought layers, and they will still in a way just constitute one direction, but they will be much more different to one each other than they were in the beginning. So it is an enhancing of the difference. It is a way of making it bigger and bigger, and thereby making the direction, the force, the resilience stronger and stronger. You can think of this as many layers of fractality going on top of each other. And this is the delta T depth of Susie Froebel. For each layer it becomes more of a rich structure, more fractal, and more persistent, and much more forceful. And somewhere in this process you start feeling that thinking really has a command. They really do something, and you will not spend that energy in discussing with yourself your previous ideas or gone memories in that way. Instead, all past will be a source of energy, of fractality. It is the very division in bad and good that is part of the problem. That is that oversimplification that makes for a much less fractal world. And there is another thing, it's another fear here, and it's the lack of power all of a sudden, that the ego will lose its power to self-construct the world. Will not be longer possible for the ego. It thinks itself, for it makes its own makeshift world, the world that only you inhabit, and the world that you don't even understand, because it is completely endogenous. It's the beetle in the box once more. And of course, to make an example, this is a power that Cartesius would never have given up, because his whole philosophy sort of points to him clinging to the little he has. He already acquired the idea of lack. He doesn't accept that there is a plenty to be had, that the world, that time, that space, that knowledge is unending, infinite venture, and it has so much more energy to give. No, he's stuck in that low level, and of course he had to be, because he's born way before quantum mechanics. But it still shows the point. Still would have taken convincing if were he born after quantum mechanics. And there's this fear of losing out. But trust me, fractality doesn't have any losing ends. It's never either or in quantum mechanics. Never, ever. And it's that mindset of either or that starts us to think, I need to get rid of some thoughts. I need to change my thinking. That meaning I need to like use a broom in my head and cast out some thoughts. The negative experience I need to take away. I need to be in the now. I need to meditate over the now with the little lamb. You don't have to, because the either or doesn't really hack it in the higher level. And that is, of course, the message also from paraconsistent logic. You can eat the cookie and still keep it. And I think that mindset with either or is maybe one of the greatest obstacles to go further. It is for me, without a doubt. I'm stemming from logic since, I don't know, 20, 30 years. My either or is very, very decisive. I always think in either or. But in fractality, either or doesn't really make sense. Everything is part of the complexity, so to speak. And it's more accurate. And for me, that is convincing when I realize that fractality is more accurate. Then I give in. Then I say, well, I'm going over to the point of fractality. This is the proof I needed. But that's me. We're all different on that take, and I hope you are a little bit less close-minded than I am. But I did study logic for a whopping 15 years. At home or in the institutions. It is the thing for me, always been. But I see the same thing happening with my logic as I would say happening in a high level. It's not taking away of the old logic, it is expanding it. And paraconsistent logic is a greater logic, quite literally, because it limits the cases by knowledge where explosion shouldn't be the case, and therefore making logic a much, much more decisive tool when we need it. Whereas explosion makes logic nilly-willy. It makes it just a habit without much strength to it, not with much decisive power. You can say about the classical logic, sorry, I'm just going to take some more chocolate. I do recommend cacao drink. It's very soothing for the stomach. You can say that it would be fair to say that classic logic applies everywhere and nowhere, whereas the more specified paraconsistent logic, yes, it doesn't apply everywhere, but where it does apply, it is very sharp. It do tell you things, and it's practically usable. Paraconsistent logic you can have in your decision process, or when you're doing something mathematically, like constructive mathematics. You use paraconsistent logic. So what would I prefer? Well, with that understanding, I will happily abandon classical logic very quickly, because it doesn't cut it for me to have a logic that applies to everything, but doesn't have a decisive power. It will be a straw man, an empty vehicle, an empty receptacle of nothing inside, just a sheer surface. And I remember actually the saying of one of my teachers. She was on her last year of the doctorate. She wasn't a proper professor, but she was interviewed in the local newspaper, GP, what she was doing, and they asked her, have you ever used it? And she said, I don't think so, why should I? Something to that effect. That's sort of sad, because this fractal shows that we can actually use logic in the real world, but a very much sharpened logic, and not as all over the place like Laplace demon, being everywhere and nowhere at the same time. And the thing I didn't like was this nowhere. So I changed everywhere and nowhere for somewhere, and having an effect. That was my decisive movement. No, the ego is a bit like paraconsistent logic. It opens up and thereby strengthens itself. And this is a process you will learn to trust. I had the same experience. Taking in the space above me and behind me made me actually less balanced in the beginning, but I realized was my own scare of taking in too much space. You acquire a habit of doing it more and more, and you sharpen your senses, and you will see thinking that way, thinking as a skill, will make for a much sharper thinking, more decisive thinking. I think thinking that actually has effect, and a thinking in the end that can do sequences and simultaneity in the same way, at the same point. And this is also the case of deconstruction. Much criticized today. I saw another criticism by Jordan Peterson the other day, attacking Derrida and Foucault. What Derrida wants to do is help the author, help the philosopher, help the mathematician. By making what he tries to say more complex, making stir a larger surface for us to have contact with from our point of view, so that our endogenes coming from us have a lot more to meet. So the two hermeneutical circles or horizons will be larger, and there will be much more of a read, because it's broadening, it's deepening. And I would say regular reading today is very one-dimensional, not because ideology, but because we have become one-dimensional, because our world is one dimension only, but repeated 3 times. True dimensionality is something much more complex. And the true dimensionality of the text, this is what Derrida is pointing to, truly and honestly. I take his project to be an absolutely honest mission, not to destroy anything, but to help. It's a helping hand. This in some ways is very similar to Edward de Bono and Wittgenstein, wanting to help. But motivation can this way be much higher. And once you understand the bigger freedom, the greater liberties, and just the thing that you can keep everything to the higher level, nothing can get lost in fractality. No oppositions need to take the plus and minus against each other and sort of reduce each other to zero. No, that will not happen. It will be a lot of things left in this organization. And there is no real limit in the fractal game. You will see that by making your intentionally fractal, you will gain more and more. And the more intention you receive, the more you can sort of put into the place, put into the projection. And that will strengthen your desire, because desire comes in here. And if that sounds odd, remember there is a desire in the metaphysics of presence. There is a desire for the now. This desire needs to be much stronger, and it will be much stronger because it's run by fractality. And it's this very intention that will lead you in the end. And you will gain the power to understand that thinking is the most important thing. It's actually very, very strong. And we neglected this, not on purpose, but how knowledge happened to sort of form itself in our Geschichte. And that makes for limits. But all of a sudden now, in modern days, for the last 100 years, this can actually be opened up, thanks to knowledge. And we can gain all the intention, motivation as we desire. And of course this is satisfaction, because in the old model, when all the past is bad and all projection fails, this is what satisfaction lies. And that, I think, should be the most, the strongest motivation thing in the end. Your own well-being, body and soul. I mentioned before, Susie Frohl has shown consistently that a more healthy body plus soul is a more fractal one. Our bodily system are, of course, like the third fractal. And by acknowledging that fractality, by taking in the surrounding space, getting into fractal time, and also getting into fractal knowledge, we strengthen that. And as we go into the higher knowledge, that will be a more encompassing. So you have multiple levels of knowing of the same thing. You will be able to have different truth values without there being either nullification, as Rudolf Gersh called it, or a paradox that needs to be solved. You can have that. You can sort of add knowledge a little bit like you're adding things to a basket. Just put more things in there. And this will translate, and this is the third, all the gain you can need. Because since everything is coming from fractality, you will gain in all areas, bar none. It will be a rather massive adding. So you don't have to give anything up. You can be better at analyzing, contextualizing, like shown by Barbara Tversky. You can contextualize, you can recontextualize, you can decontextualize, you can intellectualize, you can think potensively, you can think backwards, and you can be able to have language that really speaks, because I think that seemed to be the main point of Wittgenstein. I think it goes much further than that. We lose our ability to make ourselves understood. We also lose our ability to understand others. But going into fractality, we gain the power of understanding. It's not a diminishing of understanding. It is you gain it. You get more of it. You get more accurate. Accuracy is something that Bertrand Russell strived for his whole life. And when he met upon Wittgenstein, that he thought was most accurate, he went into depression that never left him. Here you can actually gain accuracy. In your thinking, in your doing, you can be more precise. Because when your body is more fractal and when your mind is more fractal, accuracy is what thinking is. Accuracy is, at its best, a thinking mind that is like a sharp knife. It cuts exactly where it's needed, or a shovel that shovels exactly what you need to have shoveled. So you gain in all areas. This is almost a repetition of the first paragraph, that there is no loss here in this area. There cannot be any loss. Fractality that doesn't make any sense. None whatsoever. And also in the awareness, something pointed out by Ian McGilchrist. He differentiates between the smaller awareness to discrete points, almost like a 400 thing, that belonging to the left hemisphere, and the right hemisphere being the bigger picture, the grander picture, a panoramic view that takes in everything. And here it seems to be a choice, either you have one or the other. But in fractality, it is clear that you gain in both ends. You both gain in the discrete, the precise, and you will also gain in the grander picture. And you do it absolutely simultaneously. You can do it at the very same time. This is why it's so hard in the beginning to think that, well, I take in what is behind me and then I lose the front. No, you don't. You win at both ends. And this is why fractality is somewhat different from polarity or binary oppositions. You could say that fractality explains how we can have binary oppositions and polarity, but it doesn't really explain the vice versa. You cannot understand fractality from polarity. So it's a lower way of understanding. Still a type of understanding, you have to make do of it if you don't have any access to anything else. But there is in fractality always the possibility of a greater, grander understanding. And isn't that hopeful, if anything? I say thank you very much, and I wish you a very pleasant afternoon. Bye-bye.